Non-Progress by John Gray. Progress celebrates Pyrrhic victories over nature. Karl Kraus. 1. De Quincey's toothache. In the early 19th century, Thomas de Quincey wrote that a quarter of human misery was toothache. He may well have been right. Anesthetic dentistry is an unmixed blessing. So are clean water and flush toilets. Progress is a fact. Even so, faith in progress is a superstition. Science enables humans to satisfy their needs. It does nothing to change them. They are no different today from what they have always been. There is progress in knowledge, but not in ethics. This is the verdict both of science and history, and the view of every one of the world's religions. The growth of knowledge is real, and, barring a worldwide catastrophe, it is now irreversible. Improvements in government and society are no less real, but they are temporary. Not only can they be lost, they are sure to be. History is not progress or decline, but recurring gain and loss. The advantage of knowledge deludes us into thinking we are different from other animals, but our history shows that we are not. 2. The wheel. We think of the Stone Age as an era of poverty, and the Neolithic as a great leap forward. In fact, the move from hunter-gathering to farming brought no overall gain in human well-being or freedom. It enabled larger numbers to live poorer lives. Almost certainly, Paleolithic humanity was better off. The turn to farming was not a clear-cut event. Intensive plant gathering may have begun some 20,000 years ago. Cultivation of the land around 15,000 years ago. In some parts of the world, it seems to have followed climate change. In the Middle East, rising sea levels at the end of the Ice Age seem to have driven hunter-gatherers into the uplands where they turned to agriculture to survive. In other areas, the hunter-gatherers destroyed their environment themselves. Only after the first Polynesian settlers had wiped out moas and ravaged the seal population of New Zealand did they turn to more intensive methods of food production. By exterminating the animals on which they depended, these hunter-gatherers condemned their own way of life to extinction. There was never a golden age of harmony with the earth. Most hunter-gatherers were fully as rapacious as later humans, but they were few, and they lived better than most who came after them. The move from hunter-gathering to farming has often been seen as a change like the Industrial Revolution of modern times. If this is so, it is because both increased the powers of humans without enhancing their freedom. Hunter-gatherers normally have enough for their needs. They do not have to work to accumulate more. In the eyes of those for whom wealth means having an abundance of objects, the hunter-gathering life must look like poverty. From another angle, it can be seen as freedom. We are inclined to think of hunter-gatherers as poor because they don't have anything. Perhaps better to think of them for that reason as free, writes Marshall Salins. The shift from hunter-gathering to farming is conventionally viewed as a move from a nomadic to a settled life. In reality, it was almost the opposite. Hunter-gatherers are highly mobile, but their life does not require continuous movement into new territory. Their survival depends on knowing a local milieu down to its last details. Farming multiplies human numbers. It thereby compels farmers to expand the land they work. Farming and the search for new lands go together. As Hugh Brody writes, it is the agriculturalists, with their commitment to specific farms and large numbers of children, who are forced to keep moving, resettling, colonizing new lands. As a system, over time, it is farming, not hunting, that generates nomadism. The move from hunter-gathering to farming harmed health and life expectancy. Even today, the hunter-gatherers of the Arctic and the Kalahari have better diets than poor people in rich countries, and much better than those of many people in so-called developing countries. More of the world's population is chronically undernourished today than in the old Stone Age. The shift from hunter-gathering to farming was not only bad for health, it greatly increased the burden of work. The hunter-gatherers of the old Stone Age may not have lived as long as we do, but they had a more leisurely existence than most people today. Farming increased the power of humans over the earth. At the same time, it impoverished those who turned to it. The freedom of hunter-gatherers was bounded by restraint. Infanticide, geronticide, and sexual abstinence limited their numbers. Once again, these practices can be seen as consequences of their poverty, but they are just as well viewed as ways of maintaining their freedom. Hunter-gatherers did not take to farming because it gave them a better life. Very probably they had no choice, whether as a result of climate change or a slow buildup in population, or because wildlife had declined through overhunting. hunter-gathering communities found themselves impelled to increase food production. Hunter-gatherers who took up farming outbred those who did not. Farmers drove the remaining hunter-gatherers into less hospitable territory, or simply killed them off. The remainder were driven to the edge of the world, marginal lands such as the Kalahari, where they linger today. The shift to farming did not have a single source, but wherever it happened it was both an effect and a cause of growth in human numbers. Farming became indispensable because of the larger population it made possible. From that point onwards there was no turning back. History is a treadmill turned by rising human numbers. Today, GM crops are being marketed as the only means of avoiding mass starvation. They are unlikely to improve the lives of peasant farmers, but they may well enable them to survive in greater numbers. Genetic crop modification is another turn in a wheel that has been in motion since the passing of hunter-gathering. 3. An irony of history. One of the pioneers of robotics has written, "In the next century, inexpensive but capable robots will displace human labor so broadly that the average workday would have to plummet to practically zero to keep everyone employed." Hans Moravec's vision of the future may be closer than we think. New technologies are rapidly displacing human labor. The underclass of the permanently unemployed is partly the result of poor education and misguided economic policies. Yet it is time that increasing numbers are becoming economically redundant. It is no longer unthinkable that within a few generations the majority of the population will have little or no role in the production process. The chief effect of the Industrial Revolution was to engender the working class. It did this not so much by forcing a shift from the country to towns as by enabling a massive growth in population. At the beginning of the 21st century, a new phase of the Industrial Revolution is underway that promises to make much of that population superfluous. Today, the Industrial Revolution that began in the towns of northern England has become worldwide. The result is the global expansion in population we are presently witnessing. At the same time, new technologies are steadily stripping away the functions of the labor force that the Industrial Revolution has created. An economy whose core tasks are done by machines will value human labor only insofar as it cannot be replaced. Moravec writes, "Many trends in industrialized societies lead to a future where humans are supported by machines, as our ancestors were by wildlife. That, according to Jeremy Rifkin, does not mean mass unemployment. Rather, we are approaching a time when, in Moravec's words, almost all humans work to amuse other humans. In rich countries, that time has already arrived. The old industries have been exported to the developing world. At home, new occupations have evolved, replacing those of the industrial era. Many of them satisfy needs that in the past were repressed or disguised. A thriving economy of psychotherapists, designer religions, and spiritual boutiques has sprung up. Beyond that, there is an enormous gray economy of illegal industries supplying drugs and sex. The function of this new economy, legal and illegal, is to entertain and distract a population which, though it is busier than ever before, secretly suspects that it is useless. Industrialization created the working class. Now it has made the working class obsolete. Unless it is cut short by ecological collapse, it will eventually do the same to nearly everyone. 4. The discrete poverty of the former middle classes. Bourgeois life was based on the institution of the career, a lifelong pathway through working life. Today, professions and occupations are disappearing. Soon they will be as remote and archaic as the ranks and estates of medieval times. Our only real religion is a shallow faith in the future, and yet we have no idea what the future will bring. None but the incorrigibly feckless any longer believe in taking the long view. Saving is gambling. Careers and pensions are high-level punts. The few who are seriously rich hedge their bets. The proles, the rest of us, live from day to day. In Europe and Japan, bourgeois life lingers on. In Britain and America, it has become the stuff of theme parks. The middle class is a luxury capitalism can no longer afford. 5. The end of equality. The welfare state was a byproduct of the Second World War. The National Health Service began in the Blitz, full employment in conscription. Post-war egalitarianism was an after-effect of mass mobilization in war. Look back to the 19th century, to the time between the end of the Napoleonic Wars and the outbreak of the First World War. That great era of peace in Europe was also a period of great inequality. The majority of the population lived from hand to mouth, and only the very rich were safe from sudden poverty. Today, nearly everyone is much better off, Yet the rackety existence of the majority is as far removed from the security enjoyed by the truly wealthy as it was in Victorian times. In affluent, high-tech economies, the masses are superfluous even as cannon fodder. Wars are no longer fought by conscript armies but by computers, and in the collapsed states that litter much of the world, by the ragged, irregular armies of the poor. With this mutation of war, the pressure to maintain social cohesion is relaxed. The wealthy can pass their lives without contact with the rest of society. So long as they do not pose a threat to the rich, the poor can be left to their own devices. Social democracy has been replaced by an oligarchy of the rich as part of the price of peace. 6. A billion balconies facing the sun. The days when the economy was dominated by agriculture are long gone. Those of industry are nearly over. Economic life is no longer geared chiefly to production. To what, then, is it geared? To distraction. Contemporary capitalism is prodigiously productive, but the imperative that drives it is not productivity. It is to keep boredom at bay. Where affluence is the rule, the chief threat is the loss of desire. With wants so quickly sated, the economy soon comes to depend on the manufacture of ever more exotic needs. What is new is not that prosperity depends on stimulating demand. It is that it cannot continue without inventing new vices. The economy is driven by an imperative of perpetual novelty, and its health has come to depend on the manufacture of transgression. The specter that haunts it is glut, not of physical goods only, but of experiences that have palled. New experiences become obsolete even more quickly than do physical commodities. Adherents of traditional values rail against contemporary license. They have chosen to forget what every traditional society understood, that virtue cannot do without the solace of vice. More to the point, they are blind to the economic necessity of new vices. Designer drugs and designer sex are prototypical 21st century commodities. This is not because, in the words of J.H. Prynne's poem, music, travel, habit, and silence are all money, though this is what they are. It is because new vices are prophylactics against the loss of desire. Ecstasy, Viagra, the S&M parlors of New York and Frankfurt are not just aids to pleasure. They are antidotes to boredom. In a time when satiety is a threat to prosperity, pleasures that were forbidden in the past have become the staples of the new economy. Perhaps we are lucky to be spared the rigors of idleness. In his novel, Cocaine Nights, J.G. Ballard presents the Club Nautico, an exclusive enclave for rich British retirees in the Spanish resort of Estrella del Mar. The memory-erasing white architecture, the enforced leisure that fossilized the nervous system, the almost Africanized aspect, but a North Africa invented by someone who had never visited the Maghreb, the apparent absence of any social structure, the timelessness of a world beyond boredom, with no past, no future, and a diminishing present. Perhaps this is what a leisure-dominated future would resemble. Nothing would ever happen in this affectless realm where entropic drift calmed the surfaces of 1,000 swimming pools. In order to stave off psychic entropy, society resorts to unorthodox therapies. Our governments are preparing for a future without work. People will work, or rather, some people will work, but only for a decade of their lives. They will retire in their late 30s with 50 years of idleness in front of them, a billion balconies facing the sun. Only the thrill of the forbidden can lighten the burden of a life of leisure. Only one thing is left which can rouse people: crime and transgressive behavior, by which I mean all activities that aren't necessarily illegal, but provoke us and tap our need for strong emotion, quicken the nervous system, and jump the synapses deadened by leisure and inaction. Ballard's prospect of a billion balconies facing the sun has proved to be deceptive. In the 21st century, the rich work harder than they have ever done. Even the poor are spared the perils that go with having too much time on their hands. But the problems of social control in an overworked society are not so different from those in a world of enforced leisure. In a later novel, Supercan, Ballard portrays the model business community of Eden Olympia, where the acédie of burnt-out executives is treated with a regime of carefully metered violence, a microdose of madness like the minute traces of strychnine in a nerve tonic. The remedy for senseless work is a therapeutic regime of senseless violence, carefully choreographed street fights, muggings, burglaries, rapes, and other even more deviant recreations. The rationale of this regime is explained by the resident psychologist who orchestrates these experiments in controlled psychopathy. The consumer society hungers for the deviant and the unexpected. What else can drive the bizarre shifts in the entertainment landscape that will keep us buying? Today, the doses of madness that keep us sane are supplied by new technologies. Anyone online has a limitless supply of virtual sex and violence. But what will happen when we run out of new vices? How will satiety and idleness be staved off when designer sex, drugs, and violence no longer sell? At that point, we may be sure morality will come back into fashion. We may not be far from a time when morality is marketed as a new brand of transgression. 7. 20th century anti-capitalists, the phalanstery, and the medieval brethren of the free spirit. A generation ago, an obscure revolutionary group calling themselves situationists inspired anti-capitalist riots that shook the capitals of Europe. The situationists were a small and exclusive sect which claimed to possess a unique perspective on the world. In reality, their view of things was a mélange of 19th century revolutionary theories and 20th century vanguardist art. They took many of their ideas from anarchism and Marxism, surrealism and Dada, but their most audacious borrowings were from a late medieval sodality of mystical anarchists, the Brethren of the Free Spirit. The situationists were heirs to a fraternity of adepts that extended across much of medieval Europe, and which, despite unceasing persecution, persisted as an identifiable tradition for over 500 years. The situationists' dream was the same as that of this millenarian cult, a society in which all things were held in common and no one was forced to work. In the early 60s, they enlivened student protests in Strasbourg with quotes from the medieval revolutionaries. During the events of 1968, they scrawled similar graffiti on the walls of Paris. Among the most memorable of these was "Never Work." Like the Brethren of the Free Spirit, the situationists dreamt of a world in which labor had given way to play. As one of them, Raoul Vaneigem, wrote, "Taking into account my time and the objective help it gives me, have I said any more in the 20th century than the Brethren of the Free Spirit declared in the 13th? Vaneigem was right to see modern revolutionary movements as heirs to the mystical anarchist cults of the Middle Ages. In both cases, their goals came not from science, but from the eschatological fantasies of religion. Marx scorned utopianism as unscientific, but if scientific socialism resembles any science, it is alchemy. Along with other Enlightenment thinkers, Marx believed that technology could transmute the base metal of human nature into gold. In the communist society of the future, there was to be no limit on the growth of production or the expansion of human numbers. With the abolition of scarcity, private property, the family, the state, and the division of labor would disappear. Marx imagined the end of scarcity would bring the end of history. He could not bring himself to see that a world without scarcity had already been achieved in the prehistoric societies that he and Engels lumped together as primitive communism. Hunter-gatherers were less burdened by labor than the majority of mankind at any later stage, but their sparse communities were completely dependent on the earth's bounty. Natural catastrophe could wipe them out at any time. Marx could not accept the constraint that was the price of the hunter-gatherer's freedom. Instead, animated by the faith that humans are destined to master the earth, he insisted that freedom from labor could be achieved without any restraints on their desires. This was only the Brethren of Free Spirit's apocalyptic fantasy returning as an Enlightenment utopia. More even than Marx, the situationists dreamt of a world without, in Vaneigem's words, the time of work, progress, and output, production, consumption, and programming. Labor would be abolished, and humanity would be at liberty to indulge its whims. This dream owes a great deal to Marx, but it resembles still more the fantasies of Charles-François Fourier, the early 19th century French utopian. Fourier proposed that in future humanity should live in monastery-like institutions, phalanstères, in which free love is practiced and no one is compelled to work. In Fourier's utopia, homo ludens rules. The situationist utopia is an updated version of Fourier's, but in a lapse of mind they seem never to have noticed the administration of this workless society is handed over to workers' councils. These are not meant to be organs of government, for, we are assured, none will be needed. Going even further than Fourier, who had proposed that dirty work be done by children, the situationists declared that automation would make physical labor unnecessary. Without scarcity or work, there would be no need for conflict. As in Marx's utopian vision, the state would wither away. As far as the future was concerned, the situationists were unshakably confident. About the present, they were darkly pessimistic. A new form of domination had been perfected, they maintained, in which every act of apparent dissent actually takes place in a worldwide spectacle. Life had been turned into a show, which even those who staged the play could not escape. The most radical movements of revolt quickly became part of the act. In a familiar irony, that is exactly what happened to the situationists. Their ideas soon reappeared as the cleverly marketed nihilism of punk rock bands. Despite their protestations, the situationists soon became just one more commodity in the cultural supermarket. The revolution of which they dreamt was nowhere in sight, yet they retained an unruffled certainty. Their most gifted thinker, Guy Debord, insisted, "A changeover is imminent and ineluctable, like lightning, which we know only when it strikes." In the purest millenarian tradition, Debord believed that dark forces ruled the world, and that their power was about to vanish overnight. His apocalyptic serenity did not last. Perhaps the evident absurdity of his hopes of a worldwide proletarian revolution against consumer culture finally sank in. Or it may be that more personal factors were at work. In 1984, Debord's publisher was murdered, and in 1991 his widow tried to sell the company. Debord was at a loss. In a memorably farcical episode, the uncompromising refuser of the spectacle advertised for a literary agent in the Times Literary Supplement. It is not known if there were any replies. In any event, Debord signed with a new publisher, Gallimard, and his work gained wider currency, but his mood did not improve. A lifelong drinking habit induced deepening depression. In 1994, at the age of 62, he shot himself. The situationists and the brethren of the free spirit are separated by centuries, but their view of human possibilities is the same. Humans are gods stranded in a world of darkness. Their labors are not the natural consequence of their inordinate wants. They are the curse of a demiurge. All that needs to be done to free humanity from labor is to throw off this evil power. This mystical vision is the situationist's true inspiration, and that of anyone who has ever dreamt of a world in which humans can live without restraint. 8. Mesmerism and the new economy. Markets have always been partly figments, but today they are more so than ever before. New technologies do more than transmit information. They change behavior by propagating moods. Not only does everyone receive news faster than before, the mood it creates is far more swiftly contagious. The internet confirms what has long been known. The world is ruled by the power of suggestion. In late 18th and early 19th century Austria, Anton Mesmer showed that hypnotic suggestion can have a profound effect on human behavior. Ridiculed in his lifetime, Mesmer was remembered through the popular name for hypnosis, mesmerism. 60 years later, Jean Charcot showed the connection between hypnosis and hysteria and became one of the founders of psychiatry. Financial markets are moved by contagion and hysteria. New communications technologies magnify suggestibility. Mesmer and Charcot are better guides to the new economy than Hayek or Keynes. 9. A theory of consciousness. In evolutionary prehistory, consciousness emerged as a side effect of language. Today, it is a byproduct of the media. 10. Memories in stones. Conservationists lament the passing of wild places, but cities too are endangered ecosystems. Since Neolithic times, when they first began to emerge in places such as Çatalhöyük in contemporary Anatolia, cities have been places where humans reenact the rituals of hunter-gatherers. Humans are ill-suited to the incessant labor and recurrent migration that go with farming. Cities were created from the yearning for a settled existence. Hunter-gatherers must know their local environment intimately. They need to move freely on the land so they can track its changes, but they are not bound to move into new territory, as farmers must when they have exhausted the soil. The lives of hunter-gatherers circle around a place they never leave or cease to explore. All cities were once new, but it is ancient cities that best meet the need for a settled existence. Ian Sinclair believes old cities bear the psychic traces of the generations that have passed through them. The churches are only one system of energies, or unit of connection within the city. There are also the old hospitals, the inns of court, the markets, the prisons, the religious houses. Each church is an enclosure of force, a site block, a raised place with an unacknowledged influence on events. Old cities are descendants in a line that goes back to the labyrinth at Knossos in Bronze Age Crete. In cities, persons are shadows cast by places, and no generation lasts as long as a street. In the post-urban sprawls that are replacing cities, Streets come and go as quickly as the people who pass through them. As cities are deconstructed into sites for traffic, the settled life they once contained is fading from memory. 11. The myth of modernization. We are all modernizers today. We have no idea what being modern means, but we are sure that it guarantees us a future. For 19th century positivists, modernity meant a new version of medievalism, a hierarchical technocracy in which science replaced religion. For Marx and the Webbs, it meant an economy without markets or private property. For Francis Fukuyama, it meant a worldwide free market and universal liberal democracy. Each of these quite different visions has been seen as the very essence of modernity. All have proved to be fantasies. We think of modernity as an idea in the social sciences, when actually it is the last hiding place of morality. Believers in modernity are convinced that, natural disasters apart, history is on the side of Enlightenment values. After all, that is what being modern means, is it not? In fact, there are many ways of being modern, and many of failing to be. It is not for nothing that a number of the expressionists were among Nazism's early supporters, or that Oswald Mosley gave press interviews seated behind a black steel futurist desk. The Nazis were committed to a revolutionary transformation of European life. For them, becoming modern meant racial conquest and genocide. Any society that systemically uses science and technology to achieve its goals is modern. Death camps are as modern as laser surgery. A feature of the idea of modernity is that the future of mankind is always taken to be secular. Nothing in history has ever supported this strange notion. Secularization has occurred in a few European countries such as England, Sweden, and Italy. There is no sign of it in the United States. Among Islamic countries, only Turkey has a well-entrenched secular state. In most others, fundamentalism is on the rise. In India, Hindu nationalism has eroded the secular state. In China and Japan, where the Judeo-Christian and Islamic idea of religion has never been accepted, secularism is practically meaningless. Despite these facts, 21st century modernizers talk in the dated accents of Marx and the positivists, 19th century Europeans who mistook their parochial hopes for universal historical laws. Theories of modernization are cod scientific projections of Enlightenment values. They tell us nothing about the future, but they do help us to understand the present. They show the lingering power of the Christian faith that history is a moral drama, a tale of progress or redemption in which, despite everything we know of it, morality rules the world. 12. Al-Qaeda. The men who hijacked civilian planes and used them as weapons to attack New York and Washington in September 2001 did more than demonstrate the vulnerability of the world's strongest power. They destroyed an entire view of the world. Everyone believed the world was becoming steadily more secular, yet on 11th September, war and religion were as deeply intertwined as ever they had been in human history. The terrorists were foot soldiers in a new war of religion. Everyone took for granted that the world was at peace. States everywhere were linked up in a worldwide network of free markets. Even the biggest of them, China, was signing up to global capitalism. Free trade had made war obsolete. But the World Trade Center was razed to the ground in a new kind of war. Everyone assumed that war meant conflict between states. Despite the evidence of 20th century guerrilla warfare, the idea persisted that if war were to come again, and few people were ready to admit that it would be an affair of armies and governments. But the network that concerted the attacks on Washington and New York was more like a postmodern corporation than an old-fashioned army. Al-Qaeda took orders from no state. It exploited the weakness of states. A byproduct of globalization, it successfully privatized terror and projected it worldwide. Everyone accepted that with globalization, modern values were in the ascendant. But if globalization means anything, it is the chaotic drift of new technologies. If it has any overall effect, it is not to spread modern values, but to consume them. In that it makes extensive use of the Internet, Al-Qaeda is certainly modern, but it uses the Internet to repudiate Western modernity. Insofar as it draws on the support of clan networks, Al-Qaeda embodies pre-modern social structures, but its refusal of modern values expresses an act of will rather than any established tradition or authority. In that, Al-Qaeda is peculiarly modern. A postmodern organization serving pre-modern values, Al-Qaeda has planted a question mark over the very idea of what it means to be modern. 13. The lesson of Japan. To say that humans can never master technology does not mean they have no control over it. It means the extent of their control does not depend on their will. Several countries have tried to shut out new technology. For a time, China gave up ocean-going ships, but the Japanese case is unique in that it involved the deliberate and sustained rejection of a key modern technology. Between 1543 and 1879, Japan gave up the gun and reverted to the sword. From having more guns than any other country in the world, it succeeded in eliminating them almost entirely. At the time it embarked on its unique experiment, Japan had several rare advantages. It was isolated and could hope to remain so. It was a highly cohesive society. It had a subtle and far-seeing ruling class, which included a strategically placed group, the samurai, that stood to gain by a policy of reverting to the sword. Taken together, these conditions enabled Japan to reject guns for several centuries. During its time of isolation, Japan was not stagnant. While shutting out guns, it produced many technical innovations of its own. A new kind of two-bladed plow, a spiked wheel potato planter, and a new kind of weeding machine were developed during the time of Japan's isolation. In many ways, the country's development was equal or superior to that of Western countries at the time. In cities, public health was better, and its postal service was more developed. There was technical innovation in Japan during the centuries in which it isolated itself, but it was slow and piecemeal, serving a traditional way of life. Noel Perrin writes, "There were armored knights striding around Tokyo and Kagoshima when the Continental Congress was meeting in Philadelphia. But a letter or a shipment of lacquer seedlings traveled many times faster between those two cities than mail did between Philadelphia and Savannah." Japan's rulers were able to shut out the modern technologies that threatened its peace because it had the option of isolation. When Commodore Perry arrived with his black ships in 1853, Japan's rulers knew it had to switch course. By the first decade of the 20th century, it had a modern navy, which destroyed the Russian imperial fleet at the Battle of Tsushima, the first time a modern European power was defeated in war by an Asian people. Any country that renounces technology makes itself the prey of others that do not. At best, it will fail to achieve the self-sufficiency at which it aims. At worst, it will suffer the fate of the Tasmanians. There is no escape from a world of predatory states. 14. Russia in the vanguard. Russians have always equated becoming modern with being like the West. The result has always been that they have been thrown back on the remains of Russia's un-Western past. Lenin's Bolsheviks were the most methodical of Russia's westernizers. Their goal was to reorganize agriculture on the model of a 19th century Western factory. The dash to industrialization that followed destroyed Russian farming. In late Tsarist times, Russia was the world's largest grain exporter. Under the Soviet system, the country's food supply came from small allotments run by former peasants. The end result of communist modernization was to return Russians to subsistence farming. It might be thought that this experiment would not be repeated, but when the Soviet regime collapsed, the Yeltsin government, heavily influenced by Western transnational agencies, again adopted a Western model. Shock therapy was used to import an Anglo-Saxon free market into Russia. Given the state of Russian industry, a vast military-industrial rust belt, this was impossible. In the event, the Russian economy plunged into a profound depression. For most people in the countryside and many in the cities, only smallholdings staved off starvation. Every attempt to modernize Russia on a Western model has failed. That does not mean Russia is not modern. Quite to the contrary, it has pioneered what may prove to be the most advanced form of capitalism. A hypermodern economy has arisen from the ashes of the Soviet state, a mafia-based anarcho-capitalism that is expanding throughout the West. The globalization of Russian organized crime occurs at a time when illegal industries, drugs, pornography, prostitution, cyber fraud, and the like are the true growth sectors in the most advanced economies. Russian anarcho-capitalism shows many signs of surpassing Western capitalism in this new phase of development. Formerly the site of many failed projects of westernization, Russia is today in the vanguard of modernization in the West. 15. Western values. When communism collapsed, most Russians longed for nothing more than to join the West. Their reward was to be treated worse than the Axis powers at the end of the Second World War. Ever since it rejected Maoism, an attempt to remake the country on a Soviet, which is to say a Western model, China has shown an unwavering contempt for Western advice. As a result, China is feted by the West as a haven of economic stability and good government. Japan was the first non-Western country to modernize, but it remains radically un-Western to this day. A far smaller proportion of the population is in jail in Japan than in any Western country, around a 20th of that in the United States. Evidently, the Japanese have yet to embrace Western values. 16. Future war. If you want to understand 21st century wars, forget the ideological conflicts of the 20th century. Read Malthus instead. Future wars will be fought over dwindling natural resources. The genocidal war between Hutus and Tutsis in Rwanda had several causes, not least the deformation of the country's tribal cultures by its Belgian colonial rulers. But it was partially a struggle for water. E.O. Wilson writes, "On the surface it would seem, and was so reported by the media, that the Rwandan catastrophe was ethnic rivalry run amok. That is true only in part. There was a deeper cause rooted in environment and demography. Between 1950 and 1994, the population of Rwanda, favored by better health care and temporarily improved food supply, more than tripled, from 2.5 million to 8.5 million. In 1992, the country had the highest growth rate in the world, an average of 8 children for every woman. Though total food production improved dramatically during this period, it was soon overbalanced by population growth. Per capita grain production fell by half from 1960 to the early 90s. Water was so overdrawn that hydrologists declared Rwanda one of the world's 27 water-stressed countries. The teenage soldiers of the Hutu and Tutsi set out to solve the population problem in the most direct way. Do not make the mistake of thinking that wars of scarcity are fought only among the poor. The wealth of the richest countries depends on retaining their grip on natural resources. In Central Asia, the great game has been resumed, with the great powers vying for control of oil as they did in the 19th century. In the Persian Gulf, poor and rapidly growing populations need high and rising oil prices to survive. At the same time, rich countries need stable or falling oil prices if they are to continue to prosper. The result is a classical Malthusian conflict. The Cold War was a family quarrel among Western ideologies. Whatever else they may be, future wars will be wars of scarcity, waged against the world's modern states by the stateless armies of the militant poor. They are certain to be hugely destructive. We may well look back on the 20th century as a time of peace. 17. War as play. Recalling an English railway station during the First World War, Bertrand Russell wrote that it was crowded with soldiers, almost all of them drunk, half of them accompanied by drunken prostitutes, the other half by wives or sweethearts, all despairing, all reckless, all mad. It was such experiences that compelled Russell to revise his view of human nature. I had supposed that most people liked money better than anything else, but I discovered that they liked destruction even better. Russell's epiphany came from glimpsing a truth not admitted in his rationalistic philosophy. He believed fulfillment was in love, the pursuit of truth, and working for a better world. What he saw in the departing soldiers was that, for average humanity, happiness is found in none of these things, but in the desperate, world-forgetting play of war. War and play have long been linked. In Homeric Greek, agon signifies the rivalry of sport and the mortal combat of war. Both are games, and, save for the glory that comes with triumph or death, neither has an end beyond itself. In Homeric and pre-Socratic times, Spariosu writes, agon was a cosmic principle which governs the transactions among heroes, among gods, between men and gods, and between mortals and Moira, fate. The Iliad is the story of a war game played out by mortals for the amusement of the gods. In Heraclitus's fragments, the world itself is a child at play, moving pieces in a game. Kingship belongs to the child. Wars are not fought to stave off boredom. They come from ethnic and religious enmities, competition for trade and territory, the life and death struggle for scarce resources. But once it is underway, war is often embraced as a release. Like tyranny, it promises to cut the cord of circumstance that tethers average humanity to its chores. As with tyranny, the promise is fraudulent, but the jobbing world is broken up, its spent hopes and empty duties left behind for a time. If war is celebrated, it is because for much of humankind it stands for a dream of freedom. In the Iliad, death in war is celebrated in song. Unlike Homer, we cannot admit the link between war and play. yet war remains a game. Among bored consumers in rich post-military societies, it has become another entertainment. As for real war, that is like smoking, a habit of the poor. 18. Yet another utopia. We can dream of a world in which a greatly reduced human population lives in a partially restored paradise, in which farming has been abandoned and green deserts given back to the earth, where the remaining humans are settled in cities, emulating the noble idleness of hunter-gatherers, their needs met by new technologies that leave little mark on the earth, where life is given over to curiosity, pleasure, and play. There is nothing technically impossible about such a world. New technologies cannot undo the laws of thermodynamics, but they can be friendlier to the earth than the old technologies. Microchips allow technology to be partially dematerialized, making it less energy intensive. Solar power allows energy consumption to be partly decarbonized, reducing its environmental impact. James Lovelock has suggested using nuclear power to counter global warming. E.O. Wilson has proposed that genetically modified foods have a role in a far-reaching program of conservation and population control. A high-tech green utopia in which a few humans live happily in balance with the rest of life is scientifically feasible, but it is humanly unimaginable. If anything like it ever comes about, it will not be through the will of Homo sapiens. So long as population grows, progress will consist in laboring to keep up with it. There's only one way that humanity can limit its labors, and that is by limiting its numbers. But limiting human numbers clashes with powerful human needs. The Kurds and the Palestinians see large numbers of children as a survival strategy. Where communities are locked in intractable conflict, a high birth rate is a weapon. In any future we can realistically foresee, there will be many such conflicts. Zero population growth could be enforced only by a global authority with draconian powers and unwavering determination. There never has been such a power, and there never will be. And yet, what if a shift in our place in the world were to come about without anyone planning it? What if our designs for the future were moves in a game in which we are only passing players? 19. Post-human evolution. Nearly 150 years ago, Samuel Butler wrote, "It appears to us that we are ourselves creating our own successors, giving them greater power and supplying, by all sorts of ingenious contrivance, that self-regulating, self-acting power which will be to them what intellect has been to the human race. Humans are no more masters of machines than they are of fire or the wheel. The forms of artificial life and intelligence they are constructing today will elude human control, just as naturally occurring forms of life have done. They may even replace their creators. Natural life forms have no built-in evolutionary advantage over organisms that began their life as artifacts." Adrian Wolfson writes, "It is by no means certain that living things constructed from natural biological materials would be able to outcompete their synthetic and ahistorically designed machine-based rivals. Digital evolution, natural selection among virtual organisms in cyberspace, may already be at work. Soon telephone exchanges may be run by living software. But the new virtual environment is no more controllable than the natural world. According to Mark Ward, once a system is handed over to living, breeding software, there is no turning back." The fear that humans could be supplanted by machines is voiced by Bill Joy, one of the architects of microprocessors. Now, with the prospect of human-level computers in about 30 years, a new idea suggests itself, that I may be working to create tools which will enable the construction of the technology that may replace our species. How do I feel about this? Very uncomfortable. While condemning his actions, Joy echoes Theodore Kaczynski, the Unabomber, who wrote of his despair at humans being reduced to the status of domestic animals. The replacement of humanity by its own artifacts is a curious prospect. But could the more highly evolved offspring of human artifacts be more destructive of other forms of life than humans themselves? Humans could soon find themselves in an impoverished environment different from any in which they have ever lived. Almost inevitably, they will seek to remodel themselves, the better to survive in the wasteland they have made. Benign bioengineers may seek to remove the genes that carry biophilia, the primordial feeling for other living things that links humans with their evolutionary home. Only a breed of ex-humans can thrive in the world that unchecked human expansion is creating. If humans were sidelined by machines and driven, like today's hunter-gatherers, to the edges of the world, would that be a worse fate? 20. The soul in the machine. Those who fear conscious machines do so because they think that consciousness is the most valuable feature of humans, and because they fear anything they cannot subject to their will. They fear the evolution of conscious machines for the same reason they seek to become masters of the earth. As machines slip from human control, they will do more than become conscious. They will become spiritual beings, whose inner life is no more limited by conscious thought than ours. Not only will they think and have emotions, they will develop the errors and illusions that go with self-awareness. Thinking machines will surely have languages of their own. They will not be artificial languages which convey only the conscious thoughts of their makers, but natural languages, no less rich and obscure than our own. Natural languages contain more meaning than their users can ever express. The vernacular languages of machines will soon be more eloquent than the artificial languages of humans. Esperanto was meant to be a transparent medium for our thoughts, but if it ever comes to be as widely spoken as English, it will be just as opaque. In the same way, the artificial intelligences we are now devising will evolve to talk to one another, and to us, in ways no one fully understands. Like us, the talking machines of the future will find themselves saying more than they can ever tell. Everyone asks whether machines will someday be able to think as humans do. Few ask whether machines will ever think like cats or gorillas, dolphins or bats. Scientists searching for extraterrestrial life ponder anxiously whether mankind is alone in the universe. They would be better occupied trying to communicate with the dwindling numbers of their animal kin. Descartes described animals as machines. The great cogitator would have been nearer the truth if he had described himself as a machine. Consciousness may be the human attribute that machines can most easily reproduce. It may be in their capacity for consciousness that humans and machines they are now devising are most alike. The digital world was invented as an extension of human consciousness, but it soon transcended it. In future, the digital world will outreach even the minds of machines. The virtual universe created by the World Wide Web cannot be grasped by any mind. According to George Dyson, no digital universe can ever be completely mapped. New technologies are creating a new wilderness, a realm that humans can wander in without ever understanding. The emergence of a virtual wilderness does not compensate for the loss of the earthly one that humans are destroying, but it is like it in being unknowable by them. The new wilderness is a pathway leading beyond the borders of the human world. As Margulis and Sagan have written, the Gaian meaning of technology reveals itself as a human-mediated but not a human phenomenon whose applications stand to expand the influence of all life on Earth, not just humanity. As machines evolve, they will come, to use a way of speaking that long predates Christianity, to have souls. In the words of Santayana, spirit is itself not human. It may spring up in any life. It may detach itself from any provincialism. As it exists in all nations and religions, so it may exist in all animals, and who knows in many undreamt of beings, and in the midst of what worlds. Throughout history and prehistory, animists have believed that matter is full of spirit. Why not welcome the living proof of this ancient faith?